The room went silent when my assistant whispered, "Your jet is ready, Miss Hartwell." That was the moment they finally realized who I had become. It wasn't the kind of invitation you'd expect to dread. A heavy linen envelope, embossed letters spelling out my family name, the Hartwells. It landed on my desk like a threat, tossed casually between quarterly reports and a half-empty coffee mug, delivered by my assistant with a curious raise of her eyebrows. "Special delivery, Emery," she remarked dryly, "the kind you usually tell me to shred." I picked it up carefully, feeling its stiff, elegant texture beneath my fingertips. Funny how the smallest things could dredge up memories you'd rather bury. The scent of expensive perfume, the distant echo of laughter, the chill of a grand hallway where your footsteps never seemed welcome. Let me guess. Charity gala or family reunion? She tilted her head, amused. Dinner, actually. Very intimate. Your mother's handwritten note says your presence is strongly requested. I laughed bitterly. Requested? Marjorie Hartwell never requests. She summons. The invitation was beautifully impersonal, but beneath my mother's neat script lay years of coded meanings. Return. Obey. Behave. I hadn't set foot in the Hartwell estate for a full decade. 10 years ago, I'd left silently, taking nothing but a worn duffel, a fading photograph, and a promise to myself to never again be anyone else's disappointment. Yet here I was, 35 years old, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity firm I'd built from the ground up, staring down a piece of paper that instantly made me feel like an awkward teenager again. "Toss it," I instructed, handing it back to my assistant. She didn't move. Instead, she gently placed it back on my desk. "Maybe it's time you showed them who you've become. You've avoided them long enough." "Why bother?" I leaned back, resisting the urge to tear the invite in half. They weren't interested when I was struggling. They're certainly not owed a seat at the table now that I'm successful. My assistant, Anika, who knew my moods better than anyone, folded her arms thoughtfully. "Maybe you're owed something." I sighed deeply, looking out my penthouse window across Seattle's skyline, glass buildings glittering against a restless evening sky. What could possibly draw me back to that cold mansion on the outskirts of Connecticut, that world I'd left behind? But even as I argued silently, I felt the old tug of unanswered questions. Questions I'd buried beneath years of boardroom victories and ruthless negotiations. Questions about why my father, Arthur Hartwell, had never once called after I'd left, or why my older sister, Victoria, had silently watched our mother cut me from every family portrait, every public memory. "I'll think about it," I conceded finally, waving Anika away. She left quietly, closing the door with practiced gentleness. Alone, I allowed myself to open the envelope again, my eyes tracing each careful curve of my mother's handwriting. My name, Emery Hartwell, was written with forced elegance, as if even penning the letters caused her pain. It wasn't curiosity that finally convinced me to go, nor nostalgia. It was something simpler: closure. The kind you only get by facing ghosts in their territory, not yours. A week later, as my private plane descended toward the familiar landscape of my childhood, I realized I wasn't returning home to reclaim something lost. I was going to remind myself why I'd left. I chose my clothes carefully. No designer labels, no visible signs of wealth. Just a tailored black suit, elegantly understated. Beside me, Anika read off the evening schedule from her tablet, each point punctuated by the faint hum of the engines. "Dinner at 8. Cocktails beforehand. Your mother specifically asked guests to arrive promptly." She glanced at me, eyebrows raised. "Think she'll notice if we show up fashionably late?" I smiled humorously. "Oh, she'll notice. Marjorie notices everything, except what actually matters." The car ride from the airstrip was silent, each mile eroding my carefully constructed composure. The sprawling estate loomed ahead, Hartwell Manor, unchanged, intimidating, trapped in time. Even the hedges lining the driveway seemed hostile, clipped sharp as knives. Inside, the golden glow of chandeliers spilled through the massive windows, illuminating figures I recognized immediately. My mother, Marjorie, statuesque in black velvet. My sister, Victoria, smiling coolly at some joke made by a man I didn't recognize. My cousin Sebastian, flamboyant as always, swirling a crystal wine glass like it was an extension of his arm. Anika glanced at me, catching my hesitation. You know, we can always leave. I can invent an emergency, an acquisition in London, or a crisis in Tokyo. I shook my head slowly. No, we're here now. Let's see this through. The door opened before we could even knock, as if they'd sensed my presence. The butler, still the same solemn figure I remembered from childhood, gave a polite nod. "Welcome back, Miss Emery," he murmured, his eyes carefully neutral. Stepping inside, I was immediately enveloped in the subtle scent of wealth. Aged oak, polished silver, and freshly cut lilies, my mother's favorite. Voices echoed from the grand dining room, laughter as brittle and sharp as crystal glassware. At the table, silence settled instantly as I entered, conversations freezing mid-word. Every eye turned toward me. Victoria's narrowed slightly. Sebastian's widened in surprise. Marjorie, at the head of the table, offered a smile devoid of warmth. "Ah, the prodigal daughter," she said softly, raising her chin slightly. Her voice carried the same biting elegance I'd remembered. "How thoughtful of you to join us, Emery. Finally tired of playing with your computers." Chuckles rippled politely around the table, led predictably by Victoria. I took my seat at the far end, noting bitterly how quickly a place setting had appeared, the chair uncomfortable, as if chosen specifically to remind me where I belonged. "I must admit," Victoria chimed in, her voice dripping honeyed venom, "we were surprised to hear you'd actually accepted Mother's invitation. You're usually so good at disappearing." Sebastian leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "And what is it exactly you're doing these days, Emery? Some startup thing? Something to do with apps, I imagine?" Before I could respond, Marjorie waved a dismissive hand. "Let's not embarrass her further, Sebastian. Emery has always chosen her own path, even if it's not exactly traditional." The table murmured agreement, quietly amused, their judgment cloaked in civility. My fingers tightened subtly around the edge of the linen napkin, but outwardly I remained calm, even indifferent. Then Marjorie tilted her head, eyes cold as marble. "You know, Emery, family is about legacy. Surely your little venture won't leave much of a mark. Perhaps it's time to reconsider our offer to bring you back into the fold." I met her gaze steadily. "Your fold isn't the kind I fit into anymore." Her lips thinned, displeased. The conversation around us cautiously resumed, but tension hummed just beneath the polished surface. I glanced toward Annika, standing quietly near the doorway, phone in hand, subtly attentive. Dinner was served, exquisite dishes passed around with whispered compliments. I barely touched the perfectly cooked salmon or the vintage wine, my appetite dulled by familiar resentment. Eventually, Sebastian broke the strained politeness again. "So, Emery, what is it exactly you do all day, besides avoiding family?" I leaned back, slowly, thoughtfully, aware of the attentive silence. Then I caught Annika's discreet nod from the doorway, our subtle signal. "Well," I began evenly, voice measured and calm, "I'm currently overseeing a major cybersecurity deployment for NATO. We just closed a $1.4 billion contract last month." Silence deepened sharply. Sebastian's wine glass froze halfway to his lips. Victoria's smug expression slipped momentarily. Marjorie blinked once, her facade carefully rebuilt. "How impressive, darling," she said softly, voice tinged with disbelief. And yet, none of us had heard. My smile held no warmth. "Perhaps you weren't listening." At that exact moment, Annika approached quietly, whispering respectfully, but clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Miss Hartwell, your pilot just confirmed. Your jet's ready for departure. Paris conference tomorrow morning, remember?" Gasps rippled quietly. Forks hesitated above plates. Eyes widened, glances exchanged nervously. I rose calmly, folding my napkin neatly beside my untouched plate. Turning back, I met my mother's stare evenly. "You were right, Mother. Family is about legacy. I've just decided to build my own." Then, without another word, I turned and walked from the dining room, leaving behind the stunned silence and echoes of a past I'd finally outgrown. I didn't look back, but I didn't need to. Even with my eyes forward, I could feel the pressure of their silence behind me. A shocked quiet that filled the air more completely than any scream or accusation ever could. Behind my steady steps was the weight of old resentments, now finally shifting to confusion and disbelief. Good. Let them wonder. Let them doubt. Let them question how the daughter they dismissed had become someone whose absence could silence a room. Outside the dining hall, Anika fell into step beside me. Her heels clicked softly against the marble tiles, echoing off walls that once felt like a prison. She glanced briefly at my expression, assessing carefully before she spoke. "Was it everything you hoped it'd be?" she asked quietly, eyes sparkling with gentle amusement. I smiled faintly, exhaling a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Honestly, better. That stunned look on my mother's face almost made the past 10 years worth it. "Almost," she echoed knowingly. "Almost," I agreed. But before we reached the front entrance, before freedom and fresh air could reclaim me, a voice carried sharply from behind us. It was unmistakable, crisp, authoritative, every syllable laced with carefully managed anger. "Emery." My mother's voice rang like a warning bell. "A word, if you please." I halted mid-step, turning slowly, deliberately, as if every motion cost me something dear. Marjorie Hartwell stood framed in the archway leading from the dining room, elegant as always, her posture perfectly rigid, her eyes like shards of glass, clear, beautiful, but ready to cut deep at the slightest misstep. "I'll wait by the car," Anika whispered, stepping discreetly away. Her fingertips brushed reassuringly against my arm, a subtle reminder of loyalty in a house where trust had always been scarce. Now it was just the two of us, mother and daughter, suspended between past and present in a corridor lined with portraits of ancestors whose gazes seemed disapproving, eternally watching, eternally judging. Marjorie took a slow breath, her voice softening just enough to resemble motherly concern. "Is this truly how you wanted tonight to unfold? Was it really necessary to humiliate your family publicly?" I almost laughed, bitterly amused by her mastery of revisionist history. "Publicly?" I echoed, tilting my head slightly. "That was a family dinner, not a press conference. Or are you suddenly concerned about reputation now that you realize I have one?" A shadow flickered briefly across her expression, annoyance mixing with surprise, swiftly hidden behind practiced composure. "You misunderstand, Emery. I'm merely suggesting you reconsider your approach. Your actions tonight, your theatrics, don't reflect well on the Hartwell name." "The Hartwell name?" I repeated softly, almost tasting the irony. "That's what's important to you. Always has been. But you know something, Mother? I spent years being nothing more than a footnote in your story. Tonight, I decided to rewrite mine." She hesitated, the briefest flicker of uncertainty in eyes usually sharp as blades. "Rewrite all you like," she finally retorted, recovering swiftly, voice hardening again. "But don't expect me to applaud your theatrics. Some of us built reputations through dignity and quiet strength." I leaned forward slightly, holding her gaze with unflinching calm. "Quiet strength? Like when you had the servants remove my photographs after I left? Or when you erased me from every family story? Was that dignity? Or cowardice?" Her jaw tightened slightly, and I saw a crack in her mask, fleeting but unmistakable. It vanished quickly, replaced with icy control. "We did what was necessary. You chose your path, Emery, a path of rebellion and reckless defiance." "Rebellion?" I laughed softly, genuinely amused. "My rebellion was building a life you couldn't control. Reckless defiance was daring to succeed without your permission." She opened her mouth, a rebuttal ready, but footsteps interrupted us. We both turned simultaneously to see Victoria, my sister, approaching slowly from the dining room, a cautious smile painted thinly across her lips. "Mother Emery," she began delicately, her voice a carefully constructed peace treaty. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation in private. The guests are starting to wonder." Victoria always had impeccable timing. I noted her deliberate choice of the word guests, as if reminding us both that our family was forever performing, always on stage. "Of course," Marjorie nodded briskly, smoothing her gown with a practiced gesture. She gave me one final glance, a cold warning in her eyes. "We'll finish this another time, Emery." She walked away gracefully, dignity wrapped around her shoulders like an expensive shawl. But before Victoria followed, she lingered briefly, her expression softer, almost vulnerable. "You've changed," Victoria said quietly, her eyes examining my face carefully, as though searching for something she'd lost. "You haven't," I replied, voice gentle yet firm. "None of you have. That's why I left." She lowered her eyes briefly, swallowing visibly. "You know, I think sometimes about how different things might have been if I'd just conformed," I interrupted calmly, "followed the rules, been the daughter mother wanted instead of the one I actually was." Victoria sighed, tiredness briefly showing through her carefully maintained poise. Maybe things would have been simpler." "Simpler," I echoed, a sad smile tugging at my lips. "But at what cost?" She didn't reply, simply nodded once before turning back toward the dining room. "Safe travels, Emery," she murmured softly. Her footsteps faded, leaving me alone again beneath the watchful eyes of painted ancestors. I lingered briefly, allowing memories to surface, of childhood laughter turned silent by Marjorie's disapproving stare, of evenings spent locked in my room reading forbidden books about coding and technology, each page turning rebellion into determination. Then, abruptly, my phone vibrated gently, a message from Annika. "Car's ready? Say the word and we leave." I drew a deep breath, closing my eyes briefly. 10 years ago, this corridor had felt endless, every step heavy with doubt. Now, as I walked toward the door, each step felt lighter, stronger, more certain. Tonight, the ghosts of my past had tried and failed to reclaim me. Outside, the air felt cool and clean, free from the oppressive atmosphere of family expectation. Annika stood beside the waiting car, the driver discreetly holding open the door. "Everything all right?" she asked, softly, as I approached. "For the first time in years," I replied honestly, stepping into the car. "It feels like it might be." As we pulled away from Hartwell Manor, I glanced briefly backward, noting how the lights in the windows blurred gently in the night, like stars fading behind cloud cover. A thought crystallized clearly in my mind, solid and unshakable. You can't change the family you're born into, but you can always choose what kind of family you build for yourself. I leaned back, shoulders finally relaxing, the city lights of my new life waiting ahead, bright and welcoming. For the first time, my past felt truly behind me, and I was ready, at last, to move forward. The car rolled quietly through the night, the steady hum of tires against pavement soothing my nerves. Streetlights flashed rhythmically past the tinted windows, casting brief shadows that danced across my lap. It was calming, this movement, this subtle reassurance of forward momentum, so different from the suffocating stillness I just left behind. Beside me, Annika sat quietly, scrolling through messages and updates on her phone, occasionally glancing in my direction with cautious empathy. I appreciated her silence, the subtle way she respected the weight of the moment, sensing that I was still processing the evening's encounter. After a few more quiet miles, though, curiosity finally got the better of her. "You know," she said softly, turning toward me, eyes reflecting the dim glow from her screen, "you never really talk much about what happened back there. Not that it's any of my business, but tonight was the first time I ever saw Marjorie Hartwell speechless." I exhaled slowly, gaze fixed on the passing scenery, as fragments of my childhood replayed vividly in my mind. "My mother," I began carefully, "was never the kind of person to show vulnerability. Tonight, for a second, she lost control, and everyone at that table felt it." Annika nodded slowly, considering. Was it satisfying, seeing that? I hesitated, carefully choosing my words. "I thought it would be," I admitted finally, "but it mostly reminded me why I left in the first place." Silence filled the car once more, thoughtful rather than oppressive. Memories I'd tucked away surfaced gently, like forgotten photographs in an old attic. The echoing laughter of family parties where I always stood quietly in corners, a silent observer, never truly invited in. The sting of overheard whispers describing me as different or odd, or worst of all, an embarrassment. And the memory that still cut deepest, the day of my father's funeral, the one I'd learned about too late to attend, informed by an impersonal letter sent weeks after the fact. "Did I ever tell you about the day my father died?" I asked abruptly, turning fully to face her. She shook her head softly. "You've never really talked about him." My father, Arthur Hartwell, was complicated. Not unkind exactly, just distant, absorbed by work and maintaining the family legacy. But as a child, I always felt he saw me differently, somehow clearer than the rest of them did. My voice softened involuntarily. He never openly supported my choices, but he never openly condemned them either. When I decided to study computer science instead of law, he simply looked at me, shook his head, and said, "Emery, the Hartwells don't change the world. We preserve it." That always stuck with me. Annika tilted her head thoughtfully. "Did you ever want his approval?" I sighed, staring down at my hands, fingers intertwined tightly. "More than anything, at first. I think every child secretly hopes their parents will one day look at them and see someone they're proud of. But I knew pretty quickly I'd never be the daughter he envisioned. He wanted a caretaker of tradition, and I wanted to build something entirely new. So I guess eventually I stopped waiting for his approval. I had to." She nodded gently. "But his death, how did you feel when you heard?" I hesitated, the memory still raw enough to ache, even years later. It was my mother's cruelty that hurt the most. Not inviting me to the funeral was her final punishment, her way of making it clear I was no longer part of their world. I found out weeks later, through a condolence card mistakenly forwarded by a family friend. It was as if my father's death finally erased the last reason to pretend I existed. Anika's eyes softened with empathy. "I'm sorry." I smiled faintly, grateful but resigned. "Don't be." That moment defined everything afterward. It forced me to rely entirely on myself. It made me stronger, but it also made sure I'd never look back. Until tonight. The city lights grew brighter as we entered downtown, each familiar landmark a comforting reminder of how far I'd come. My company's headquarters loomed ahead, a sleek, towering structure I'd carefully chosen to represent strength, innovation, and clarity. Unlike the cold, ornate halls of Hartwell Manor, this building felt alive, its walls humming with possibility and the spirit of creation. We pulled smoothly into the private garage beneath the building, and the car came to a gentle stop. Neither of us moved immediately. The enclosed silence felt intimate, protective, a bubble of honesty rarely shared even between close colleagues. "Do you ever regret leaving your family behind?" Anika asked finally, her voice quiet, hesitant. I considered carefully, reflecting on the long nights spent coding alone, the brutal rejection letters I'd taped to my wall as motivation, the slow, steady climb toward independence and eventual success. I regret losing a version of family I wanted but never truly had. But I don't regret the decision itself. It wasn't just about leaving them. It was about choosing myself. Anika smiled faintly. I think that's the bravest thing anyone can do. We stepped out of the car, the sound of our heels echoing slightly in the empty garage. The elevator hummed smoothly upward, bringing us back into the heart of a world I'd built entirely on my own terms. As the doors slid open onto my expansive office space, lined with sleek monitors glowing softly in standby, I paused at the threshold, suddenly overcome with gratitude. This, I gestured toward the quiet expanse of glass, chrome, and screens, is my real family, the one I created, the one I chose. Anika glanced around appreciatively, her eyes shining with pride. And it suits you perfectly. Walking slowly toward my desk, I picked up a small framed photograph sitting discreetly in one corner, an old snapshot I'd rescued from an abandoned drawer years earlier. It was the last photo I'd ever taken with my father, captured on a rare summer afternoon when I'd been 10 years old. He had his hand resting lightly on my shoulder, neither affectionate nor distant, just quietly present. I remembered the moment clearly, how I'd secretly wished he'd say something meaningful, something encouraging. Instead, he'd simply whispered, "Remember, Emery, it's the choices we make in silence that shape us." At the time, I hadn't understood. Now, standing in my office, surrounded by everything I'd built through those silent choices, his words felt prophetic, a quiet affirmation I'd unknowingly followed throughout my life. Anika gently touched my shoulder. "Are you okay?" I nodded softly, carefully placing the photograph back down. Better than okay. I think tonight finally showed me the truth about my family. They haven't changed, but I have. And for the first time, I genuinely feel like that's enough. She smiled warmly, stepping away discreetly. "Good night, Emery." I watched her leave, grateful for the quiet understanding between us. Alone once more, I gazed out over the glittering Seattle skyline, feeling clarity wash over me, cleansing and calming. My father's words echoed gently in my mind once again. The choices we make in silence. I finally understood. My silence hadn't been weakness or surrender. It had been quiet determination, careful rebellion, a steady march towards something entirely mine. And tonight, at last, the silence I'd maintained for years had finally spoken louder than any words could. Smiling faintly to myself, I sank into the comforting embrace of my chair, knowing with certainty that the hardest chapter was behind me. Now, it was time to write the next one. On my terms, in my voice, in my silence. 2 days passed. 2 quiet, calculated, exquisitely normal days back in Seattle. The press release about our European Defense Initiative went live. The board signed off on our Singapore expansion. A team in Zurich sent over encryption architecture revisions, and I approved them between sips of black coffee and silence. But beneath that surface, beneath the smooth rhythm of success, something lingered. Not regret, not resentment, just residue. Emotional static from a dinner that was supposed to end in finality, but left a door half-cracked open. Then, the unexpected happened. They came here. It was Annika who intercepted them. She stood outside my glass-walled office, hands folded, face unreadable. "Your sister," she said, "is in the lobby." My eyes rose from the report I was reviewing. "Victoria?" She nodded once. "And your cousin, Sebastian. Both here. No appointment, no warning. Said it was important." I let the words hang in the air for a beat. I hadn't seen either of them since I walked out of that mansion. "I'll see them," I said finally. Annika's eyebrows arched in surprise. "Are you sure?" "No," I replied, "but let's do it anyway." She returned moments later, trailing Victoria and Sebastian like a storm cloud and a colorful balloon, respectively. Victoria was in head-to-toe cream, blazer, heels, posture. Her perfume hit the room before she did, lilac and something colder. Sebastian wore oversized sunglasses indoors and carried a tumbler of what I hoped was coffee, but assumed wasn't. They took seats across from my desk without invitation. Victoria smiled tightly. "We didn't mean to just drop in, but after the other night, well, we figured we owed it to you." "Owed what?" I asked, fingers laced calmly on the desk. "An explanation," Sebastian offered, removing his sunglasses dramatically. Victoria's tone turned careful, curated. "Mother was surprised by your announcement. We all were." "You mean the part where I own a defense technology firm valued over $6 billion? I asked, voice like glass. "Yes, I imagine that was hard to swallow." She didn't flinch. She was trained better than that. Instead, she leaned forward slightly. "We're not here to rehash old mistakes. We're here because we want to understand. How did it all happen? You left, you disappeared, and now you're this." I could feel the curiosity vibrating beneath her words, not just intellectual interest, but something more desperate. This wasn't admiration, this was damage control. "You want my origin story?" I asked flatly. "You think if you understand it, you can control it? Maybe package it in a way the Hartwell name can tolerate?" Sebastian snorted. "Come on, Em, don't be like that. We were never enemies." "You weren't anything," I said. "You stood by and let it happen. That's worse." Victoria blinked. She didn't deny it. I stood, walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking downtown Seattle. It started with nothing. A sublet in a shared apartment in Brooklyn, a second-hand laptop, one meal a day, cold showers, nights where I thought I'd never make rent. You remember that, Sebastian, when you called me the hacker hobo behind my back? He shifted uncomfortably. "It was a joke." I turned. "It wasn't funny." Victoria's voice softened. "Why didn't you ask for help?" I laughed once, dry and sharp. "Because the last time I asked, you said the family didn't bankroll experimental careers. You said I should try PR, that I had a good camera face. That was years ago. And it stuck." Silence grew between us. Then, unexpectedly, Victoria sighed. "Look, maybe we deserve that. Probably do. But the world you've built, Emery, it's impressive. I'm not just saying that." "Then why are you here?" I asked. She hesitated, the business side of her kicking in. "We're representing a private equity group," she admitted. "They're interested in cybersecurity infrastructure, long-term investments, and if Arcadia's open to future partnerships—" "No," I said immediately. "But you haven't even heard." I said no. Sebastian frowned. "But this isn't about family, it's business." "That's the problem. To you, there's no difference." I walked back to my desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folder. Inside was a printed version of an email, one I'd never deleted, one I'd never needed to read more than once. I slid it across the desk. Victoria picked it up and read silently. It was an internal memo from 10 years ago, circulated among the family's trust attorneys. It described me as unfit for inheritance inclusion, citing my unpredictable career direction and negative brand alignment. "You saw this," she whispered. "I was accidentally copied," I said flatly. "That memo taught me more about my place in this family than 20 years of Christmas cards." Victoria closed the folder slowly. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, there was something real there. Not just regret, grief. "We didn't know," she said. "Mother never told us." "I believe you," I replied, "but it doesn't change anything." Sebastian stood, suddenly restless. "So that's it? You'll shut the door again, even if it could be good for Arcadia?" "Arcadia doesn't need you," I said. "But if you'd like a tour of the server floor, I can show you where we encrypt federal intelligence. Maybe that'll help your portfolio." He raised both hands. Message received. Victoria stayed seated, quiet. Finally, she stood too, her tone gentler now. "We were cruel, or indifferent, maybe both. But I don't want that to be our legacy, Emery." I met her gaze, unwavering. "You don't get to define legacy. Not anymore." With nothing left to say, they left. Anika returned a moment later, watched them disappear into the elevator with a sigh. "Let me guess," she said. "They came bearing gifts and left carrying shame." I chuckled. "Something like that. Want me to block their numbers?" "Already done," I replied. But inside, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt light, like I just put something heavy down. Not revenge, not even justice, just truth, laid bare. I walked over to my desk, sat down slowly, and stared at the Hartwell memo still lying open. Then I reached for my phone, not to call anyone, just to delete the file, for good, because this chapter, finally, was closing. The next morning, the sky over Seattle stretched wide and unapologetic, a sheet of gunmetal gray broken only by streaks of stubborn sun. I stood barefoot in my living room, coffee cooling between my palms, the city below humming like a distant conversation I wasn't yet ready to join. The night before had left me with clarity, but clarity has a way of cracking open something deeper. You think the confrontation is the end. You think slamming the door is closure. But sometimes it's what echoes in the silence afterward that unsettles you the most. My phone buzzed. Annika. Annika. Incoming FedEx. Overnight from Connecticut. You want me to intercept? I smirked, sipping the lukewarm coffee. Me. Let it through. I'm curious how bold they're getting. Less than 2 hours later, the package arrived, wrapped in gold foil with cream ribbon. Always on brand, always theatrical. Inside, a handwritten note from my mother, Marjorie, on Hartwell stationery so stiff it could slice a finger. Her penmanship hadn't changed since I was a child, upright, elegant, and utterly devoid of warmth. Emery, I believe enough time has passed. We are who we are, and I suspect neither of us is interested in relitigating the past. But I wonder if we might instead look towards something else. Legacy is a fluid thing. If you are open to it, I'd like to discuss ways we can align the Hartwell name with the extraordinary work you've done. M. No apology, not even a pretense of one. Just branding. Just business. I set the letter aside without responding, folding it once down the center and sliding it under a stack of folders. Not everything needs fire or final words. Some things deserve only quiet rejection. Still, her words echoed, irritatingly. Legacy is a fluid thing. But I knew what she really meant. Reputation is negotiable when money's on the table. I left the penthouse, took the elevator down 43 floors, and walked into our strategy lab, Arcadia's core. The room was alive with energy. Engineers clustered around digital sandboxes. AI modules pulsed on glass monitors. The hum of servers felt like a heartbeat beneath the floor. This wasn't just my company. It was my cathedral, my rebellion, my sanctuary. As I entered, a round of casual greetings met me. "Morning, Emery." "Hey, boss. You see the NATO specs? They're insane." Annika found me near the biometric display wall. She wore black today, not in mourning, but as armor. "You okay?" I nodded once. FedEx delivered a reminder, but it didn't land. She smiled. "That's progress." Then, something unexpected. "Actually," she said, lowering her voice, "you've got another visitor. Not from the East Coast this time." I blinked. "Who?" She glanced over her shoulder. "Your old professor from NYU, a guy named Sheldon Rayner." The name hit me like a sudden gust of winter air. "Dr. Rayner?" I repeated. "Yeah, said he was in town for a conference, asked if he could stop by." I hadn't seen Dr. Rayner in over a decade. He was the only person from that part of my life who ever treated me like I wasn't a disappointment wrapped in ambition. When I dropped out of my master's program to launch Arcadia, he didn't tell me I was throwing away my future. He told me to build a new one. "Where is he?" I asked. "Lobby. Want me to bring him up?" "No, I'll go to him." I found him in the downstairs cafe, nursing an espresso with the same patient intensity he used to reserve for debugging student code. He looked older, yes, but in the way trees look older, more layered, not diminished. He stood when he saw me, eyes crinkling. "Ms. Hartwell, or should I say, Madam Executive?" "Don't you dare," I laughed, embracing him quickly. "You look good." "So do you," he said, like someone who's been winning arguments with billion-dollar contracts. I gestured toward a table by the window. "Come on, tell me what brings you to my side of the country." He settled in, crossing his legs, folding his hands over his knee. "I'm keynoting at the Cybertrust Summit," he said, "but honestly, I couldn't be this close and not see you. I followed your journey, Emery. You've built something astonishing." I looked away for a second, touched in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't supposed to be this big. At first, it was just a way to prove I wasn't wasting my time. "Funny," he said. "The best things usually start that way." There was a pause. Then he reached into his worn leather satchel and pulled out something wrapped in paper. "I brought you something," he said. I unwrapped it carefully. A faded spiral notebook, one of the ones we used in his advanced encryption course. Inside were my original sketches for a framework that would one day become Arcadia's flagship protocol. "You kept this?" I asked, stunned. "You left it behind," he said simply. "I knew someday you'd want to remember how it started." For the second time in 24 hours, I felt something shift inside me. Not regret, not sadness, gratitude. I ran my fingers along the paper, the smudged notes, the half-solved equations. "You know," I said slowly, "when I left NYU, I wasn't sure if I was brilliant or reckless." He smiled warmly. "You were both, but brilliance matters more when it's stubborn." I laughed. "That's one way to describe me." Before we parted, he asked, "Do you think you'll ever reconnect with them, your family?" I considered that question more deeply than I'd anticipated. I think they want to reconnect with what I've become, but they still don't know who I am. He nodded, satisfied with the answer. "That's fair, and maybe that's enough for now." He left, and I returned upstairs, the notebook in hand. I placed it on my desk beside the framed photo of my team at our last company retreat. Smiling, chaotic, brilliant. My chosen people. Annika popped her head in. "You good?" I looked at her and, for the first time in years, felt something deeper than satisfaction. Peace. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." That evening, before I left the office, I took out a blank sheet of paper and wrote a single line. Some legacies are inherited. Others are built from scratch with bare hands and an unshakable will. Then I folded it, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote only one word on the front: return to sender. Because some stories don't need a sequel, they just need an ending. Some endings don't explode. They don't shatter like glass or scream across a stormy sky. Some endings just settle, softly, finally, like dust in a room no one dares to enter anymore. That's how it felt the day the box arrived. Not the gold-trimmed Hartwell stationery kind. This one came plain. Brown cardboard, no return label, no fanfare. Just my name, handwritten in sharp block letters that I recognized instantly. Victoria. Inside, there were no letters, no apologies, no half-hearted declarations of unity or redemption. Just 3 things, carefully placed in white tissue. 1, a photograph of the family dinner table, taken from outside the manor through the glass with perfect timing. Everyone was seated, every seat filled, except mine. 2, a silver knife from the dinner service set, the one I never used because I always preferred the smaller ones meant for fish. My mother had once said that was tacky. And a note on a torn piece of lined paper, not Hartwell stationery, not monogrammed, not rehearsed. It read, "You were right. We didn't see you. Maybe we didn't want to. I don't know if this makes a difference, but I remember. I do. V." I stared at it for a long time. Some people might have cried. Others might have been enraged. I just felt still, as if the storm had passed and this was the part where you check for damage. The truth is, I didn't need the photograph, or the knife, or the note, but I appreciated the weight of them, the effort, the honesty, clumsy, imperfect, real, and that made them worth something. I placed the items in a drawer I rarely opened, not to hide them, not to bury the past, but to respect it, like you might do for someone who once meant something to you and now only exists in your memory as a lesson. A week later, I found myself in the city again, New York this time. Not for business, not for board meetings or speeches or press junkets. For me. I visited the old Brooklyn apartment where I started Arcadia, just to stand across the street and remember. The windows had been replaced, the stoop had been painted, but the building still leaned slightly, like it carried the weight of 1,000 forgotten stories. I smiled. Then I walked 2 blocks over to a little coffee shop I used to work from when I couldn't afford an office or heat. It was still there, same cracked tile by the back wall, same stubborn espresso machine. The barista, a guy who couldn't have been more than 23, looked up from the counter as I ordered. Name for the order? I hesitated a beat. Then I said, Emery. Just Emery. Because sometimes that's all it needs to be. Later that night, back in my hotel, I opened my laptop. Not for email, not for Zoom meetings, just to write something for myself. Something I'd been thinking about since that dinner. A letter. Not to anyone else. To me. Dear Emery, you didn't fail them. They failed to see you. That's not on you. It never was. They said you were an embarrassment, a shadow, a threat. But you became a lighthouse. You lit your own path, and now others follow it without even knowing your name. You showed up. You didn't flinch. You told the truth. You left with your spine straight and your soul intact. That's more than legacy. That's freedom. P.S. That chair at the table, it was always too small for you anyway. I closed the laptop, let the words sit. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I let go. Months passed. Arcadia landed its NATO contract. We expanded into Sao Paulo and Berlin. I spent my birthday in Tokyo, eating udon with Annika and laughing so hard I nearly spilled broth into my phone. I moved into a new space, one with windows that wrapped around the entire floor. The kind of place you don't just live in. You exist in it. You expand in it. And slowly, the messages from the Hartwells faded. First came silence. Then, inevitably, the outreach. A holiday card from Sebastian. A photo of Victoria with her daughter, now 8, holding a drawing she titled Aunt Emery's Rocket Company. And then, Marjorie. An envelope. Inside, not a letter, not an apology, just a photo. An old one, black and white. A little girl, no older than 5, in a treehouse with a book on her lap and a flashlight tucked under her chin. The handwriting on the back said, "I found this while cleaning. You always read more than the rest of us. Maybe you knew something we didn't. M." No signature, just that. I looked at the photo for a long time. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. But I placed it on the shelf behind my desk, right between the Arcadia founding plaque and the patent certificate for our encryption protocol. Not as a reminder of them, but of her. The girl in the photo, the one no one believed in, the one who read in shadows, the one who built empires in silence. Me. On the anniversary of Arcadia's 10th year, we hosted a gala. Black tie, rooftop, the kind of night built for cameras and whispers and million-dollar handshakes. As I stood before the room to give my speech, I scanned the crowd. Investors, team members, journalists, diplomats. Family? No, not the old one, but my people, my real ones. Annika stood in the back, arms crossed, eyes bright. Our lead engineer, Riley, hovered near the champagne, already buzzed and beaming. Even Dr. Rayner had flown in from the East Coast, suit rumpled, heart intact. I took the microphone, paused, then said, 10 years ago, I started Arcadia in a room with no heat and one chair. It wasn't a seat at any table. It was a floorboard and a dream. But dreams, like code, don't need permission to execute. They just need commitment. Tonight, I don't thank the people who doubted me. I thank the people who showed up, the people who stayed, the people who saw. This company isn't my legacy. My choice to build it is. And I'm proud to say that choice was mine. Fully, completely, quietly. The crowd clapped. But what I heard was my own voice, echoing in a way I hadn't let it for years. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing in defiance of the Hartwells. I wasn't standing against them at all. I had simply moved on. On the drive home that night, Annika leaned over in the car and asked, "Do you think she saw the news coverage?" "Marjorie," I shrugged. "If she did, she probably thought the lighting was too harsh and my dress too modern." She laughed. "You didn't mention them at all." "No," I said, "because this wasn't their story." I looked out the window as the city swept past. Lights flickered. Buildings rose. A new world. My world. And at last, I felt no need to explain how I got there. I had nothing left to prove, nothing left to avenge, and nothing I'd trade for the peace of knowing I never needed their table. I built my own. And every seat at it, every damn seat, was filled by people who saw me. Not the name, not the bloodline, me. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.